Sure. There was lots of questions as we went through there. 3 really fascinating businesses, speaking with such passion and about that journey and how they've changed and the sort of pitfalls. So, who's going to kick me off? Chap at the back. If you could say who you are as well, that'd be great.
So my name is Ollie Pemberton. I look after the farm here at Waddesdon, and we are very much at the beginning of this journey. I think we're a lot behind you guys. One of the things we're struggling with is choosing those cover crop species we're using when you think about wider rotation issues, disease carryovers, green bridges, all that sort of stuff. Has that been something that has been a problem or something that actually I don't need to worry about and there's some good logic behind what species you have chosen?
Great. Do you want a little snippet from everyone?
Sure.
Let's go with that. Matthew, do you want to kick us off?
So we've gone for a very diverse mix. So we will grow in 8 different species, purely safety in numbers, I feel. I want to get away from that monoculture, but as we saw this with this last summer being so warm and dry, that we had a lot of our brassicas that we had in the mix just didn't establish. But quite a few cereals as well in there, war choosing rye and spring barley in there, and that did very well. And it's just giving something else, at least if you haven't gone for 1 or 2 things and they don't get on, you've got something there, I think.
Brilliant. Phil?
I'm not the right person to ask because I'm not an arable farmer, and I'm always focused on what will give me the best feed. We always did turnips, and then I went to a 3-way turnip, grape, kale mix, and now I've gone a 16-way mix. And I just think diversity, it always surprises you. Something won't work, but something else will. But I don't know the answer to your question about the green bridge, and I sort of asked the agronomist about that and stepped sideways. Oh, you got one.
Yeah, I think I sort of looked at mine quite, as an overarching view, and looked what I wanted to grow as a cash crop for 5 years, and how I did something completely different when I wasn't growing that cash crop. And just looked at different species and what those specific, what the benefits those species brought to what I was trying to achieve. And I guess having done it for 5 or 6 years, I've probably learnt what's worked and what doesn't work, and honed in on what's worked and taken out the things that were unreliable. So I guess learning is key, and the more you do it, the more you learn what works for you and what doesn't. And I think still you never stop learning, and things will evolve. And as our system becomes more resilient and our soils become more resilient, we may need to go back 3 years and try things differently again. So I think that there's an element of experience in there, definitely, which tells you which works. But I think my advice is look at the big picture and look at where you can, all the opportunities you can bring different things in that you're not doing, as part of your actual farming rotation.
Are you going to graze it? Yes. Well, one thing we did this year, which I hadn't done before, is graze twice in the winter. And so I had a mixture of rye, vetch, a few brassica, and a few other things, Phacelia and stuff for the soil. And that was great, because when I came back round, the rye was still there, and I had another go at it, so I got 2 bites of the cherry, which was quite nice. The other thing, of course, is cost. I frightened myself a bit with our fancy trial, because it was nearly £100 a hectare for the seed, and perhaps oats would do the same job as rye, that sort of thing. You can grow it yourself, keep the cost down, but that.
Great. Thanks all. Few ideas, and also a fair bit of trial and error in there by the sound of things as well. Brilliant. Yes. Yes, you. Thank you.
Paul Heyman. I work for as a farm advisor for Promar, but also sort of got a little hobby farm really with my brother. I think clearly in all your, thank you for your talks, they're very, very good. You all mentioned that sort of mindset shift that you've had and made. And you're talking here to an audience that have probably all made that mindset shift. I'm talking to a lot of farmers as well that haven't. And how do you, when you're talking to those that haven't yet had that, what tips might you throw out to the audience and the rest of us?
Do you want to kick us off? I think really good.
Yeah, so I think that's for our role at home has been very much with the cluster, so we're 140 members within the cluster now, and the ones that have been slightly difficult to reach, because it's the exact conversation we had when we started, the converted are easy to get on board. A friend of a friend will tell another friend, and then when you get to a point like we are, all of a sudden the ones that aren't converted feel very left out. And once you've got them to a few meetings and through the door, the mind starts to change. And hopefully, once you've got them to a point where they're thinking about it, the conversations are so much easier. But I would say, from personal experience, I'd rather it go and, excuse the pun, plant the seed, just put your number there and leave them to it, because I think you're just talking to a brick wall if you just chase them, and you'll just get blocked. But we found it's been very encouraging with the cluster. We sat at our first AGM, there were 60 farmers in the room, 3 breakout groups, practically all the same thinking. And it's quite amazing, everybody around you is thinking the same. It's just how we get there.
Yeah, the stages on that journey. Phil, did you want to come in there on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I agree with everything that's been said. I think somehow you can't change people, they've got to want to change. And I loved the comment I heard somewhere that, because there's a bit of a sort of regenerative farmer, conventional farmer thing going, isn't there? But this person said, well, everyone is a regenerative farmer. Sometimes some people just haven't started on their regenerative journey yet. I know it's a corny picture, but it's good, isn't it? People are starting to come to me and tell me, well, they knew that all along, even though, if I had that conversation with them 2 or 3 years ago, they would have absolutely said, what on earth are you doing? You're mad. And for me, it's finding people like this group or other groups I'm in that aren't necessarily my neighbours or my lifelong mates, who I can bounce ideas and share ideas with, who aren't going to say, you must be crazy.
Because you said that at the beginning of the day to me, Phil, about the atmosphere that you create at these kind of things being really important, so you don't get that kind of left out feeling. I don't know would you touch on, Phil, and perhaps Nick, you mentioned about having the right people in your boat. Is there an element of that with your team or people you hire or that kind of thing? How much of a part does that play in your relationships with the rest of your team?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, very quickly, one of the most difficult conversations I've had is thinning out my dad's agronomist, who was is an absolutely lovely guy. And we started to have a conversation, and he was just, he sort of thinned himself out in the end. But, he's helped me get up and running and get established. And I started to say, look, I want to try this. And he said, Phil, I'm not the right person to take you forwards. Here's your phone number of someone who can.
Yeah, not always easy.
That.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil. And Nick, I know you've got a big team.
I think peer pressure is certainly key a lot of this, and the more you look over the hedge and see your neighbours starting to do different things, it's sort of difficult to sit there and not actually question what you're doing, and should you be trying something, and you go to a lot of meetings and farmer to farmer learning comes up a lot, and there's a huge amount of value in that, definitely. I guess ultimately this will have to come, and that as much you try and dig your heels in the ground and say, I'm not doing that, I don't need to do that, I can do it better my way. Ultimately, things are going to change, and we've addressed it by as we've gone through an agricultural transition that we've probably been able to afford to make the odd mistake because we've been supported to do so. Whereas you take that away, then those mistakes get a whole lot more expensive. And I think finishing off, about the people you surround yourself with. I have a bit of an adage where I don't take advice from anyone trying to sell me anything. Sorry to those who sell things. I bring in the right advice when I want to know, something specific. and surround myself with the good people who are, all about the same outcomes that I want to achieve, And there are a huge amount of good people out there that are all happy to come on that journey with you and offer that sort of sound advice. So I think, the sort of phrase that gets thrown around is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, then go together. And I think when it comes to this sort of transition, that holds an awful lot of weight.
Hi, Sarah Langford. Just a follow-on question about mindset. I should say thank you, Phil White, for the plug of Rooted, which I wrote. And Matthew, I stood in your field 3 years ago watching your dad and you in pissing rain try to do a water infiltration test, and we all stood and watched the water sit in the tube. And I bet that is probably the same field in which there is no standing water now.
It's still there now.
But I found it quite moving listening to you talk about the relationship with your dad, which was on show that day as well 3 years ago, and the movement. And what you said about coming into farming, despite being born into a farming family, a bit like me, but without actually knowing anything about farming. When we're talking about the speed of mindset change and how quickly we have to move this forward, should the industry and the government be looking at new entrants rather than converting people who are your dad, my uncle's generation, who maybe are slower? Should the focus not be on people outside farming? And if so, how much attention needs to be put on the universities and colleges that are teaching? I say this as someone who's just finished a graduate diploma in agriculture at Cirencester.
Great question. Matthew, do you want to start us off?
I think slightly with the new entrant point, it sometimes sits with some of us, like me, lucky to be born into farming, and that's reaching out for that expertise and lack of knowledge is the wrong word, but that open-mindedness to open to change. And it's not change, is it? Because it's a new way of thinking. I will express that since the cluster came about, Dad had a new lease of life for farming. And actually, wildlife it's actually in the field, and we think of our farm as one, not that block, that block, that block. But the new entrant thing is really good. I can see it slowly around us with CSA, veg gardens. That's another string to the bow of the farming business. But how do we encourage younger people or people from a non-farming background to come into farming is a really big question. And, talking of Clarkson, Caleb Cooper doing a brilliant job at the minute with his bursary at RAU, and inspiring so many people just to even look at agriculture. And I was talking on Sunday to a few of my old school teachers. How do we bridge that gap between school, farm to fork, but how do you make agriculture exciting? Let's get them out at a very young age and just show them, look, this is what's out there, this is what you're looking at over the hedge. And I think that sits with every single person in this room and in agriculture to open the door to other people. Just let them on farm, good or bad. People need to accept that it's not all perfect out there. There is heartbreak in farming. There is the good days, there's the bad days. But unless we open the door and let them in, they won't come.
Phil, you look poised. Did you want to come in on that?
Oh, such a great question. So much to say. You're right, Sarah. There's sometimes, in terms of return on effort reward, you're going to get a lot more from talking to a young person. Farmer time is quite good too. Everyone should do it. Link up with a school, 20 minutes a week or every other week, and you talk to the most impressionable group of kids. Education, education, education. Why isn't DEFRA supporting this? I haven't heard anything in Elms about how we're going to educate and change people's mindset, and yet it's so fundamental, isn't it? Opportunities as well, I think. It's really important that we've got the right incentives and the right structures in place, so if someone is young and has got a dog and a quad bike and a wrapper, winder, whatever it's called, let's get them to link up with the 60-year-old, most of us are white male and stale and pale or whatever it is, aren't we now, who just wants to sit on his tractor and really CBA to go and chase around after a bunch of sheep and make that collaboration happen and all the public goods that come with that, employment, environmental benefits and all that. So, I don't know, I think there's just so many opportunities, we just need to be a bit more imaginative.
Yeah, that broader look. Nick, did you want to say, I think I'm right in saying you're not from a farming background. Say a bit about your route in the industry.
Yeah, no, I am from a farming background. I grew up on a dairy farm down in Devon, so I've kind of worked pretty hard to get away from that as quickly as I could. I think one observation, or maybe one plea rather, that I think is sort of fundamental to how we address these type of issues, and it does come back to education and getting exposure to all the challenges that we have, both environmentally and as basic as where our food comes from, because this doesn't happen in schools at the moment. It's not happening. Having 3 kids that are going through secondary school or just finished secondary school, most of their learning about what happens in the environment and food production comes from YouTube and has a certain slant on it. So, every time I've had the opportunity to speak to anyone at DEFRA, I've said, please go and chat to your colleagues in education, get this back as part of the curriculum, because ultimately it's not just about what's happening, at farm scale, it's what's happening, elsewhere in every other industry. That this is key to so much that we do. So if we can increase this exposure to a wider breadth of a wider cross-section of our younger generations, then naturally that will flow through to address some of these challenges that we have, not just in farming but in every other sector that we have in this country.
Brilliant answers, and I think that think actually there's lots of different routes into this. Interesting that panel two members who by the sound of things have gone off farm and then come back. Nick, getting that broad range of ideas from Belcourt, different farming companies. So there's lots of different ways to get to the point that these 3 very inspiring farmers have got to. Any last? Yes.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm a restaurateur and work in food supply chain as well. So this might be a really stupid question because I'm not a farmer. Fabio earlier talked about data, and you guys have just talked about how supportive the cluster's been for, I think, sort of well-being, mental health, energy, and what have you. In terms of access to data for other farmers, as well as those not in the industry, it's certainly something that I've struggled with. I know there's lots of data out there, but I find it really hard to get access to the data. Where do you recommend I look, we look, and others in the room look to get access to data that helps you and helps others as well?
What sort of data are you talking about from a supply chain?
So, who's producing what and where?
In terms of local supply chains and things
yeah,
like that?
but also, as much data as possible on as many things, basically, is the answer. Because the more you've got access to, or the more data you've got access to, the more you can learn, the more you can change, the more you can help, etc.
Great. Does anyone... Nick, do you want to put us up on that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I guess there is no magic answer, and that's one of the huge problems we face. To be able to tell our story, but us for our own, to manage our business is how we benchmark ourselves, how we compare ourselves, how we learn from what's out there. No doubt there are good things coming to be able to tell us far more than what we know at the moment. I think from a food supply chain and the things that we've looked at, is actually the shorter the chain, the more you can have those conversations, the more you can learn from each other. The more you can share is the key part to this. Big data can always be steered in a certain direction. So the more open and honest you can be about what you're doing and how you're doing it, and having those conversations is certainly been one of the most fascinating things that I've done in the last few years, and just understanding exactly how everyone interprets what you're doing. I wish there was a magic answer. There isn't. I think it will come, but we're just not quite there yet.
Thanks, Nick. Any comments? Yeah, go.
You go first then.
I wish I hadn't grabbed the microphone now. It's a really great question. The 2 things I would say about data are, and I know I don't want to go back to this oversimplification and talking about carbon, but you've got to start somewhere. And I think that's probably as good a place as any to start. Some of us have started doing carbon footprinting for our businesses, which has been the first sort of tentative step into understanding what we don't understand. And so something like, we've used, what did you say? The farm carbon calculator toolkit thing, and it's given me a number. So I can now tell you how many kilograms of CO2 we emitted, equivalent. And I think that's a great number to be sharing with the people that we supply. So obviously it's a pretty raw number and it needs to be iterated a few times, and we need to see if we've got a trend, and then it's a more valuable number. But that is the sort of thing I think you could be asking farmers to do, and if they haven't done it, it's not a big issue. It's half a day's work, and then you've got them thinking. The other thing I think we can do a lot better is make use of what data is being collected by our industry body, the AHDB. There's tons of data on there. Hardly anyone knows it, and I even had somebody from the AHDB asking for something that was on there, and I said it was on your website, because we're diverse and it's complex, but there's a lot of really good information on there. And the third thing, what was the third thing? Oh, about the local food supply. There are people doing this, aren't there? Having a sort of hub with all the local producers on there, like the Pasture for Life Association, which is great for, having a database of who's producing 100% grass-fed meat in your area if you want to buy some for your restaurant or whatever. Hope that helps.
Yeah, there's pockets of that, and we can look into finding them more, because that might be placed around ecology. Matthew?
Well, from personal experience, we've been working a bit with Cotswold Flour Mill, who are then now looking at producing flour under the Regen brand. Defining Regen on a packet is a bit like we had this morning. It's quite difficult, isn't it, I think? But I think that's where a good start too is to look at your local producers and see how they're outreaching to farmers. And if it's anything like our local mill, they're very open to tell just even a consumer, but someone interested to where it's going, and that might lead to actually some real on-farm data in your local area as well, and it just helps really build that local supply chain and build a lot more confidence between farmer and consumer.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much for the top questions, and thank you very much to our fabulous farmers. Really, really interesting insights. Thank you so much for sharing a bit about your farm, a bit about your journey, the pitfalls, and where you've got to now. Really interesting businesses, and and that mindset piece and the challenges you've had in the family and the team, all absolutely fascinating. So thank you very, very much.